Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now, to the show at hand.
Matt Zock here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business experts and real estate leaders. Past guests include Devin Howland talking about economic development in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Mike Bosch of Atento Capital talking about the world of venture investing in the southern Midwestern states, and Kevin Evans of Liberty Air Services talking about HVAC systems, how they work, and why they're so darn complicated. Today's conversation will tap on some of that stuff, and we'll get deeper into how some of those complications affect our owners. But before we get started, today's episode is brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. At Keyrenter, we are a full-service property management company helping our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. We help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property management. Listen, Tracy, you know this better than anybody. It's hard to line up contractors to get a make-ready done in a reasonable amount of time. And after a tenant leaves a property, contractors are busy. The work seems to drag on forever, and all that leads to lost rental income. At Keyrenter, and also at Renter's Place today, we line up our dedicated vendors like Kevin Evans and other folks, so that turns can happen super quickly and that we can get more money back into the pockets of our owners. That's why no matter what rentals you have, single family homes, condos, townhomes, apartments, we've got the management solutions that you need. Go to KeyrenterPMC.com or info@KeyrenterPMC.com. Tracy Streich of Renter's Place, longtime friend. He's been buying and managing property for 25 years. He's the broker and owner at Renter's Place, the #1 property management company in Tulsa. Keyrenter's happy to be the #2. We're close behind, but we're a strong #2. Tracy manages 600 or so doors and has been professionally managing for others going on 15 years. He purchased his first rental property back in 99 and was managing a portfolio of his own investment properties before he jumped in to start Renter's Place, a business that manages third-party properties. Tracy, thanks for being on the show.
Matt, thanks for having me. I do appreciate. Most people would say you're a very strong #2, if you know what I'm saying. So I put that in there just as a little jab. Of course, I appreciate you.
I love it. I've always viewed us. I mean, as friends, but I don't think that other property management companies are competitors. I think of our competitors as self-managing owners. Right. So whether
I consider us friendly competitors, right? I mean, it's we call and we talk, we bounce ideas. Occasionally we exchange owners, but we help each other out as well. So.
You said it best some years ago. You were like, I might tell an owner it's going to take $15,000 to renovate this property, and they go, I don't want to hear it. You're fired. And they come to us and we go, it's going to take $17,000 to renovate this property, and they go, all right, I'll do it. It's like,
the second guy is always right, even if they're doing exactly what the first guy said.
That's right. So we do exchange clients back and forth at some points. Before we start, a quick, I don't know if it's a public service announcement or a caveat of some sorts. We got to be careful about talking about specific pricing because of antitrust legislation and perceived collusion. So for the sake of the pod, we're going to avoid talking specific prices of services, including management and maintenance costs and other stuff. Now, having said that, I want to jump into some questions. Help our viewers understand how you started buying rental properties first, and then how you made the jump into third-party management.
Okay, so back in 1999, I got my first couple of properties. I did a couple of flips and kind of did my first buy and hold then. Had a partner. We would flip a couple along the way, and we just built up a fairly small portfolio of like 11 homes that we were managing. I distinctly remember before I was managing for others, and I had a day job. I was flipping and buy and hold. And I remember I was the rent collector. So this is like, I was the typical self-managing landlord. Like, it's the 7th, who hasn't paid? I've got to drive around and knock on doors and collect rent. And this was, the days where you didn't really have online payments anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know a lot of self-managers do that today. I discourage it. I didn't want to do it then. We don't do it now. And I distinctly remember pulling up to a house that we had. They were late on rent, and I pulled up and started to get out, and there was a guy sitting on the porch, and I started to get out of the car, and he said, stay in the car. And I was like, okay. He comes up to my window and he taps on the edge. And he goes, what you want?
Oh my
I was
God.
like, rent? I don't know. And a dime bag? I don't know. Whatever you're selling. I want rent. Right. And he goes, oh, yeah, hold on. So he goes in the house And for what seemed like me, it's probably like 5 minutes, but it seemed like I was sitting there 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, are they going to come out? Are they going to shoot me? What do I need to just leave? I don't know what's going on. He came out and $650 in rent. He handed it
Oh my
through
God.
the car like this, because the largest bill was a 5.
Oh my
It was
God.
5s and 1s. And he handed it to me, and I looked at it and I remember thinking, I'm not counting that. And I just drove away. And I remember getting on the phone immediately with Steve, and it's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not managing it. We can hire somebody. I'm not managing it. I'm tired of this. And because it was a hassle.
But he was also selling small amounts of narcotics if he was doing it in 5s and 1s.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't a it was
a small operation.
It was a nickel and dime business for sure up there. So I look back on that and laugh now. But then I started to transition to, I was doing a lot of flipping during the kind of that crash back in, 2009, 10. And I had somebody come to me and he said, hey, my clients have a lot of 1031 money. They need a place and they think they want to buy some rental houses. I was like, I got 11 homes in Broken Arrow that I'm flipping right now that would be perfect rentals.
Wow, you had a big operation.
And so they said, we'll buy them all. I said, great. And then they said, but you've got to manage them because we don't want to manage them. I was like, okay, well, I'm already managing our 11 rentals. So I guess I'll just start a property management company and manage their 11. So with that 22, we just, grew to where we are today.
But why didn't you call it Rent Collector's Place then?
Well, yeah.
You were a rent collector.
Well, exactly. Because I think that, that kind of gets into what in my mind, a lot of self-managers think we do is they think we just collect rent.
Yeah.
You just collect rent. Why should I pay you X? All you do is collect rent. I was like, man, if all we did was collect rent, I'd be playing golf 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Right. It's not quite that simple.
The 7th or the 10th to the last day of the month would be easy for us.
Right. So it's not quite as simple as just collecting rent. You know that. And we can kind of get into what we do. But
let me tell you one thing.
It's not quite that simple.
So I was explaining to you before the show started that my wife and I leased our house and we're currently living with my in-laws. I call it homeless, but it's not quite homeless in the traditional homelessness sense, but I call it homeless. We bought another house and we've got it like 18 months of renovation before we get in. Anyways, I was looking at a rent house the other day because I need a place to live and we don't have anything in my portfolio that's vacant right now that works for us. And I went to see a house and the gentleman that I spoke to as a licensed realtor said he collects 12 prepaid checks. That's how he collects rent. So he gets 12 prepaid checks. And I was like, man, that sounds like a hassle. And he said, no, but I know on the first day of the month, people call me on the 29th or the 30th and they beg me not to cash that check so that it doesn't bounce and blah, blah. So I know ahead of time which checks aren't gonna be cashable. And therefore I get, them reaching out to me instead of me waiting till the 5th day of the month for their check to have bounced when they paid it through the system or whatever. I thought this is an interesting approach. It's very, very manual. It's similar to collecting rent, driving around. It's a little more sophisticated, but not tremendously more sophisticated. But what are your thoughts on just getting 12 prepaid checks for rent collection?
So did you immediately look at them and say, I don't even know where a checkbook is? Do I have to find a checkbook for this?
Is that typical? I don't have a checkbook. Yeah. Is that typical these days? Do you have a checkbook?
Is that's the guy you don't want to get behind at Target when you're checking out? He's like pulling out how much was it again? He's filling out the check. You're like, oh my gosh,
I need $10 cash back. That's true.
Yeah.
Besides that,
if somebody wants to pay in advance, great. I just think now with all the technology, if you're getting a check, you've got to, even if you're self-managing, right? And that's what we're talking about here, because I don't think a lot of professional property managers are not doing that. If you're self-managing, you have to have some way for your tenants to pay online, whether it's you reaching into their bank account and pulling it out, or them going on some sort of portal and making the payment. It's for us, and just like you, everything's automated. You pay and it registers in our system, and if you don't on a certain day, the late fee is going to hit.
Yeah.
And that starts a whole nother process of contacting them and reaching out, postings, and that's kind of some of the things you offer as a professional manager that a self-managing owner may not be doing.
Yeah. The other thing he told me was that he takes like a 5-time security deposit. So he had collected for the last tenant, he'd collected at this specific house, which is, I don't know, $2,500 a month or something. It was like he had collected like $10,000 in security plus their physical cash security deposit. I was like, that,
wow.
Even through Rhino, he did Rhino deposit. He told me, And it was, even that $10,000 would be like $200 a month paid to Rhino, which was, I just thought bizarre. And I don't know if I still quite believe it. But it's
amazing to me. Somebody's talking about checks and Rhino in the same sentence.
Yeah, that's true. True. Tell me, what do you think? What's one thing that are a few things that property managers, professional property managers, generally do better than owner operators?
Well, I think professionals probably have it a little bit more systematized, kind of across the board when it comes to just the simple things like rent collection or maintenance service. You can get online for Renter's Place or Keyrenter. You can get online and put in your work order. Bam, it's in, comes into us. We send that same work order straight out to a vendor. We've already got the vendors lined up. Whereas if you're a self-managing owner, you're getting a text from them.
Yeah. Common.
And then you're like, okay, let me copy and paste that text and send it over to my guy who may or may not be insured, but I've used him forever. So I think there's that. There's some compliance issues. Like, we've talked about this before. Homeowners complain, well, I can't believe you're charging that much for that repair. I can get the guy down that has 3 teeth at the Home Depot lot that may or may not be on meth to come do that for $15. Right?
But if he's on meth, he's doing it quicker. To be fair.
Yeah. So, for us, there's a little bit bigger of a barrier to be a vendor. And you got to have insurance. We got to have that insurance on file. You got to have workers' comp, just everything that goes with that. And if people have that, there's a cost associated with that. And you can't expect them to work for free. And I tell our vendors that all the time. I don't want you to work for free. Right. I want you to be fair.
Yeah.
But if you got to have insurance, so it's going to cost more. So the service is going to cost more. But there's so much more that goes with that for protection for us, for the owner, for the tenant, that you have to have. And I don't think, for the most part, self-managing owners are up to date on fair housing laws.
Yeah.
Maybe just not even fair housing, but like real estate laws, like on how you're supposed to actually hold a deposit.
Yeah.
And they think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, it does apply to you. Just because you're not aware of it, you still have to hold that deposit in escrow, and it's not actually income. Or the fair housing laws. Fair housing laws are changing every year.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell people, it's like, well, I don't know if I can afford a property manager. Well, first time offense, if they nab you on a fair housing, it's not like, here's your slap on the wrist. First time offense is $22,000. So you're paying us
for protection,
for that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
We stay up on that. We go to conferences where they're talking about that. I think you're going to the upcoming NARPM conference, and one of the speakers is one of the, I don't even know, government people. They have all kinds of titles, but he's the something of HUD. So he's coming to talk to us directly from HUD and give us some of those updates and talk about that. So
you've touched on liability protection. That's liability protection associated with hiring the right vendors, with knowing the current laws. And then generally you can just be sued for a whole host of things. Obviously we have a fairly litigious society. I was sued recently for not returning a security deposit in full. It's a crazy story that we, collected some of the security deposit and gave back some because we were protecting an owner from a tenant who had signed a lease. We gave him 3 weeks before the lease start date. And then he moved in 3 weeks later, decided on day one, he did not want to be involved in that house because he'd done it sight unseen, despite our ability to, our desire for him to see it, and his signing a waiver that he had not seen it. He said, you know what, this is not the right house for me. And he went back. And I said, well, I'm collecting the rent for the period of vacancy and for protecting the owner for a little bit more. And I'll give you back like your pet fee and some other stuff. And he didn't think that was enough. He sued us using a legal aid attorney. So it cost him nothing. We countersued him for the difference in what we actually gave him back. We won the countersuit. We won attorney's fees. They cut $800 off the $5,000. We billed $5,800 and they cut $800. The judge cut $800 off. So we got $5,000 in this. So he's like, he wanted $1,300 back, and we ended up getting a judgment for $8,000 or something, which is poor legal advice from his side. But ultimately, you can get sued for that kind of stuff. And if you don't have a good local attorney lined up to represent you in both the process leading up to and the litigation, you can be out a lot of money, and you end up coming down to Tulsa if you're not from here, or if you are from here, right, taking days off work to be in trial. We're in trial 2 days in this situation. And so you waste a bunch of time doing it. So I think the liability protection is a huge, huge one. I didn't think about it necessarily in those terms, but it certainly, I was thinking more like, what do we do better than owner operators? Showings, photos, whatever. But it's totally true. Liability protection is a huge, huge one.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about showings. I think you and I both do self showing. You do that, right? So
Yep,
the
absolutely.
tenant has an option for self showing. So we don't. If they call up here, we're not saying, okay, we've got to run over to 1234 West Main at 1:00 and show the property, because as a self-managing owner, as a professional, you've done this. I know you have, because I've done it. You're over there at 1:00, and at 1:25, you're like, are they coming? I don't know. You call them and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot. Or, oh, we're 15 minutes away. It takes 5 minutes to walk through most rent houses, right? But now you've killed an hour of your day. Or you get a call from a prospective renter and they say, hey, I want to see 1234 West Main. You're like, okay, when would you like to see it? Well, the translation is, I'm sitting in front of 1234 West Main right now. How quickly can you get here? We would like to see this house.
Yeah.
And people say, well, self-showing, they're gonna steal things, they're gonna, all kinds of stuff. So we've been doing self-showing for, my guess is 7 years. We've never had anybody steal. So the worst thing that happens is somebody leaves the door unlocked by accident. Right.
Yeah.
But there's a process. I mean, they're giving you their information. They're giving you their phone number. They're giving you their email. They're uploading a copy of their driver's license. Most people who are going to steal stuff are not giving you all that information.
They're going to go in about sunrise.
They're going to the house right after dark, kicking in the back door, raising the garage door, and rolling out your refrigerator, right? That's what's happening there. It just makes it so much more efficient for me. That, yes, for us, it helps us as a property management company be efficient, but for the tenant, it gets them in there quicker. For the owner, it gets at least quicker. And to me, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get it from vacant to occupied as quickly 100%. As possible.
And that's, I mean, it makes more money for our owners, but it also helps us minimize the cost. And then we don't have to pass as much through to an owner realistically.
Right.
When we have labor price increases the way we have recently, I don't know how you pay your people, but we gave them like a 20% bonus or something.
We're paying poorly.
Increase. We had a 20% increase during COVID at some point because the cost of living went up so much. And we found to retain good people, we just needed to pay a lot more. If we were spending their time instead of handling maintenance requests and sending leases and doing a whole bunch of other stuff, but showing properties at an hour a piece, and often when tenants don't show up as they had scheduled to show up, it would force us to raise our prices for our owners. And we've been lucky enough that we haven't had to. We charge a fixed rate for leasing, and we've had that same fixed rate for a bunch of years, 3, 4, 5 years now. And, if we had to show them in person, we would be forced to raise those prices, and that would hurt ROI for our owners. And we don't want to do that. Absolutely. The other thing is, to your point, we can show the property from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we do it through the, collecting a picture of the license and phone number and email and all this other stuff. And, we couldn't do that. I can't tell my property manager, hey, I know this person wants to see it at 8 o'clock, but can you leave your family and dinner time and bedtime and go show a property? They wouldn't do it. So it allows us to do what you said and, occupy a property much quicker because we have so much more flexibility. And then, I still see that many prospective tenants are used to property owners showing it individually or in person, I should say, because they call us or they text us and say, hey, I'm running 10 minutes late. I'm sorry. You know what? No problem. Just when you get there, you'll have a code sent to your text message based on the information that you've already submitted and be done. Cool. No problem. Thanks for letting me know.
It's a game changer, I think, as far as
absolutely
efficiency and saving the owner money by getting them in there more quickly.
And I do think that, for the owners that are just committed to self-showing or committed to managing their own properties, we don't do anything that's really proprietary. It's an arbitrage game. We're saying we'll save you a bunch of time in exchange for a little bit of money. And if you want to do this yourself, you can probably go on and go to Show Mojo or Tenant Turner and get these things yourself, get these systems yourself, buy these lock boxes yourself. It might not be cost effective because you don't have enough rentals to make it cost effective. Whereas we can, take one lockbox and reuse it over and over. And the lockboxes are now, we use Century Lock. They're $125 or $150. It might not be economically viable, but you can also get the tools, and you want to invest upfront for a bunch of that stuff and use them over the next decade. There's nothing. Appfolio requires that you have 50 properties under management to join, but you can use other software and do it yourself if you really want to. You'll just be doing it. You're not going to be nearly as efficient as we are, and it will take time out of your day, from whether you're a mechanical engineer or an astronaut or whatever. I mean, it'll take time out of your day to do this, and so we just take a small fee in exchange for doing that for you.
I agree.
What do you think that property owners do better than third-party property managers?
Well, I mean, if you ever get on Bigger Pockets or any of the Facebook forums, and it's always, the property manager doesn't treat it like I would. Yes, that is very true. Like, it is it's your baby, it's your house. You're always going to you're going to have more invested in it because it's your money that's invested in it. You're going to have more in it than we are as a property manager. I think that can be a pro and a con, because sometimes when you're too emotionally attached, sometimes you make, I always tell my kids, emotional decisions are bad decisions.
Yeah.
And it's hard to remove that emotion from it when you're that self-manager. Maybe it's your only house, but can they do it more effectively? If you've got one or two properties and you've got the bandwidth to do it, can you do it and maybe do it better? I mean, it'd be hard for me to argue and say, oh, no, you can never do it better than us because we're professionals.
Yeah.
If you employ the right tools and the right systems as a self-manager, for sure you can do it. The problem is a lot of people just do it fly by the seat of their pants, and they think they're doing it right, and they end up doing it wrong. They go off the whole. I mean, one of my best friends, I manage a couple of his houses. He manages a couple on his own, and he's, oh, I was over there working on the house, and this person stopped by, and they seemed great, and they want to rent it, and they're going to pay me $100 more than I thought it would be anyway, and blah blah blah. And I did a lease with it. Oh, how was the background check?
The what?
Yeah, the background check. I didn't do a background check. I felt good about them. Right?
They were in a really nice car.
Yeah, no tenant shows up and no tenant puts on their application, right? Like, I'm a deadbeat, but I want this house. I'm going to pay for 2 months and then stop paying, right? So the benefit of a background check is you can dig into some of that history of, checking some criminal background history where you can apply it. Some of it you can't apply, but what you can apply, you can look at what is their credit score. I mean, credit score is a pretty good indicator of past behavior, right? They look good, they sound good. Oh, their credit score is 520. Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to work out for us. So there's plenty of tools, like you said. There's third-party tools now available to these self-managers. Employ those.
Yeah.
Don't think the first person that walks in, I got to get it rented. Screening for me is you talk about the number one thing we do that makes our life easier is screening hardcore on the front side.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that property owners that are self-managing often don't price in their own labor. So they say they don't, I mean, if you make more than $25 an hour, I would think that using a property management company is a smart tool. If you make less than that, sure, then your time is not as valuable as other people that are using property management. But for you to be over there doing the repairs, for you to be over there, I mean, let's just take a round number and say it costs $75 an hour for maintenance and $25 for your time, and say you're going to make a bunch of mistakes along the way. You're going to fix the wrong thing. You're going to do it poorly. You've got to get on YouTube and watch a 40-minute video or a 30-minute video or whatever. So it's going to take you 3 times as long to do that maintenance, I would suspect, because I've got to go buy a circular saw. I've got to go buy a little, sheetrock hanger, whatever, a lift or whatever else. Like, it's just, you don't have the tools. So you end up buying the tools, kind of like the $60 tomato, that old book. Like, you fill in all the organic soil and you plant the seeds and you do this. And it's like, ultimately you should have just bought the organic tomato from Whole Foods. But so if you don't price in your time appropriately, I think your ROI over time is going to be significantly less if you manage it on your own. And
go ahead.
No, and I also think the same thing is true with vendors. You can call Air Comfort Solutions or Airco, one of those things, and you're going to pay $125 an hour for the labor, and they're going to, charge you for the diagnosis and everything else. And you're going to spend your own time, finding that vendor and working through that vendor and everything else, and working through a list of vendors until you find the right person. And then you don't know whether they're telling you the truth. You don't know enough about property, about maintenance and stuff to know whether you really need to replace the entirety of the HVAC system, or you're better off putting a couple pounds of Freon in because the leak is small enough that you can get by another 2 years before you have to recharge the refrigerant in the HVAC. So vendor pricing, 125 or 150 for some plumber versus 85 when you have a property management company that's buying that person's labor at scale is a big difference over time. And so a couple of those things happening over a few years can more than pay for your management services as as an owner that's doing it through a third party professional management company?
Well, a couple examples would be like, I always like to use garbage disposal, right? Because everybody who's handy thinks they can do the garbage. Like I can change out a garbage. I can change out a garbage disposal. I don't want to change out a garbage disposal. And here's why. I can send it to our maintenance guy, and garbage disposals, I don't know why. I don't know why they go bad, but they do, right? So he carries garbage disposals on his truck. He can go out there, show up. He changes so many garbage disposals. He can do it in his sleep. So all said and done, and I'm just going to, again, make up a round number and say it's $300. And somebody goes, $300 for a garbage disposal? Like, okay, one, you probably haven't priced, like you still think a garbage disposal is $75.
They're up.
So the garbage disposal is $125 to $150 by itself. So if you just started a clock and said, okay, I'm going to drive to Lowe's, I'm going to get this garbage, I'm going to drive the house, figure out I can't fix it, then I'm going to drive to Lowe's, then I'm going to drive back, then I'm going to fix it. I mean, I can change it, but I mean, Joey can change that thing in like 30 minutes. It's going to take me 2 hours because I'm also inevitably, the part's not going to exactly line up and I don't have the right flange and I got to go buy another pack of crap. And then, 3 hour, not even 3 hours, 5 hours later, I'm like, what was that worth to me?
Yeah.
I've got 5 hours of time plus the garbage disposal.
Yeah.
So I had an owner one time who had 15 houses and he bought another one. Didn't tell me about it. Somebody else said, hey, what about his new house? I was like, I don't know. Let me call him. And so we were talking. He goes, I didn't tell you I bought a new house. We're going to try and lease it ourselves. And I was like, oh, how's that going? He goes, man, these people are calling me all the time. And they just, they want to, can you meet over there? And I got to work. And I was like, no, I don't want to say his name, but so you're an attorney. Yeah. What do you bill an hour? And for 1 hour, $375 an hour. Okay. I'm charging you this flat rate to lease your house and do everything. Are you telling me in the time that you spent on that, and he still didn't even have anybody in it, I was like, you couldn't have billed like 5 hours worth of work and paid me the flat fee, which is way less than that? And he's like, yeah, I'll send you the address.
Yeah, totally. You just have to think about it the right way and really price your time. The other thing is, there are so many examples. I was questioning a maintenance technician the other day with our head of maintenance. And I said, you billed, I don't know, like $400 for this garbage disposal. Very similar situation. Well, first of all, you have to understand that prices have gone up significantly on the disposal. And then you have to understand, here's a bunch of pictures. When I pulled out that disposal, all the connecting pipes were rusted out. So I had to cut them back and replace them with new PVC because I couldn't put another disposal back on a bunch of rusted parts. And it turns out you do have to make a couple of trips. When you start pulling things apart, it's often Hobie Farrell, who's my general contractor. When I did my first house renovation, we added 700 square feet and blew out, took it all back to the studs. He used to say two things. One, you're going to get $5,000 to death every time you wanted to add something that wasn't in the original scope. And, my wife didn't like that expression, but it's true. The second thing is you can't get unpregnant. Once you tear out that wall, once you pull out that disposal, you've got to go back with something else. And you don't know what you're going to find until you actually take off that wall, whether there's wood rot or the studs are gone or whatever it is. You don't know until you pull out that wall. And It's always a surprise. So it's very hard to say to somebody, it's going to be $300 to fix this disposal because you don't know how many times you're going to have to go back to Home Depot and you don't know how many times you're going to find, another surprise lurking behind the next corner to be able to tell them that.
And I just looked it up because I didn't know. Because I really remember when we were buying these for $79. Right now, Home Depot online, that same garbage disposal is $140.
Yep. Inflation.
And it's hard. People don't have that translation if they've been doing it for a long time, I've been doing it for a long time. And I got a quote on an HVAC for one of my houses. And I was like, $10,000?
Crazy.
Like I was putting this whole thing in for $3,500. It felt like, 5 years ago. It's probably 12 years ago, but he said just on HVAC equipment since January 1 of 2022, so 14 months, he said over the course of that time, we've had 33% increase just on supplies.
Wow.
That's hard. That's hard to swallow.
Yeah, that's true. And it's happening across the board. The only thing nothing is cheaper. Nothing that I can think of is cheaper than it was before COVID. there certainly have been spikes. OSB went from 12 to 65 or 70 and is now back down. I don't know what, you can look it up on Home Depot right there, but like a sheet of OSB, I bet is $25. It's not as high as it was at its peak, but it certainly is much higher. 2x4s,
No, it's
same
still
thing.
20. It's still 100% more.
Yeah.
It's just not 500 now.
Absolutely. And it's also hard, as a property owner, and for the properties that I own, I employ our team. I do it the exact same way as any third-party client. I approve maintenance spend just like anybody else. And I'm also shocked by the price of things these days. And I go, holy moly, I remember when that was way lower. The challenge is, how do you accept inflation as you get older and understand that prices are going to be higher, and still push back and want to, maintain an ROI in your property? And one thing is, I remember when replacing a glass window was $250, now it's $400. But, I don't want to be the grandmother who is still paying a nickel to have somebody mow the lawn.
Right.
You want to, like, your gifts for Christmas or birthdays as a grandparent have to kind of maintain inflation, or else you end up being like somebody opens up a check and it's $20 and it's a check that they have to go deposit or whatever. I'm like, man, this is not, but grandma's still thinking, man, that's a pretty good birthday. When I was a kid, I got $5, 20. It must be still a pretty good gift. And it's not. It's like, it's just, it's not. How do you maintain like a semblance of control over your costs and also accept that inflation is a real thing? It's just in your brain, it just doesn't match up, and it's hard to do.
It's very hard.
What's your ideal client type, and who do you not generally like to work with in terms of clients?
Well, so I'll say a couple things on that. The hardest person to work with, and this is the self-managing owner who then who finally says, you know what, I don't want to do this. So they've said in their mind they don't want to do this and they want to turn it over, but they really still want to do it.
Right.
So that they're constantly right behind you trying to like, well, is that the way I would have done it? Is that the way I would have done it? I never paid that much, that kind of thing. So or the tenant still has their phone number. So the tenant calls us and says, well, I want blah, 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 blah. And we're like, nope, not happening. Well, then they call the owner. Says, well, Tracy said, I can't blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, let me talk to Tracy. So I tell those self-managing owners that come to us, I say, here's what you need to do. We're going to do 1 month, right? And at the end of that month, you've got to block that tenant's number. That's it. Like
Smart.
There's a little transition. There's a little transition to where maybe like things weren't communicated. They may need to talk to you or confirm with you that we're the real deal or whatever. But after that month, you got to block them, because it's just like, I mean, you got kids, right? They come to you and say, Dad, we want to blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, we're not going for ice cream. And then they go ask Mom. And well, it's probably the other way around. Mom said no ice cream. Dad's like, ice cream for everybody. So it's that way when you've got that occupied, self-managing type of deal. And I understand. Again, it goes back to we talked about what did they do better than we do?
Yeah.
It's their property. They want to know everything all the time. And I tell them, you got to trust the system. There's a system. We do this a lot. We do a lot of leases. We do a lot of maintenance. Trust the system and give it a chance. But what do I really like? I love out-of-state owners. And they're not driving by the property. They're not getting in touch with the tenant. They don't want to talk to the tenant. They just want us to do it and do it well and keep it home.
Yeah.
So those are always a good get. And then there's that meaty middle of, everybody thinks, well, man, if you could get somebody that has 20 properties, that would be great. And like, yeah, you would think. And that's what I used to think too. And you're chasing that guy's like, I got 18 properties, and you're talking to him for 6 months and then they never bring them over because they just can't let go. It's the people who have 1 or 2 properties that are kind of the bread and butter of what we want.
Yeah. The one thing, to your point about the owner that wants to hand it over but hasn't quite gotten there, and they think they're second guessing decisions, there's really no way for a property manager to do it as good in that person's mind as they do it. Right. Because we have to have a standardized process. That owner, when they get a phone call or a text message from a tenant who says the hot water heater's out, that in that instant, they know, when's the last time I changed the hot water heater? When's the last time I brought my plumber back over to fix it? They know how much money's in their bank. what their mortgage payment is, what their future expenditures are, what vacation they're taking this week or next week or whenever, and what they're saving for. They know all of that stuff at once. We just know if there's not a hot water tank, it's an emergency issue in winter and we need to have a hot water tank. And we can certainly send a plumber over to fix it. But then again, like the owner's not going to second guess their plumber who says, actually, this is the hot water tank is bad. There's, sediment in them, something at the bottom of the hot water heater, and you've got to actually replace it. And by the way, I'm billing you for my time diagnosing it, and I'm billing you for the time doing it. But they look at us and they go, well, you should have just replaced it. Why did we pay $75 to diagnose it when we should have just replaced it? Right. In hindsight, that's perfectly clear. But on the front end, if we had just fixed it right then, you wouldn't have said to us, well, why didn't you just replace it for $1,500 or whatever? Why didn't you just fix it right? It's like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And we see it all the time with appliances, right? Where it's $75 or $80 to send out the appliance guy. Sometimes he can fix it for $100 or that $75 service call. And other times he goes, you know what, this thing is terrible. And I've seen it, the stove can't be fixed because there's so much roach feces on these elements that it can't. The
mice have chewed up all the
right. Or how do we know that going into it? If I just told the owner, let's replace it on the front end, they would have said, well, you're not being a very good steward of my resources because you
can't just show up with a hot water tank in the back of the truck, assuming you're going to.
Right.
I mean, the thought is we always want to repair and then replace is last. Right. So if we can repair, owner's going to be happy, tenant's going to be happy, everybody. So, you're right. You got to, if it's the service costs $75 to go out to figure out what's going on, then we got to do that. And a lot of times the handyman can go out and if he can fix it, he will. But if he can't, he's the one saying, there's a problem. You better send the plumber. You better send the electrician. You better send the HVAC guy. It wasn't the thermostat. There's a real problem here, but you always want to try and go with the lesser option.
Right. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but hindsight's 2020.
But even those guys, you can't expect the handyman to show up for free. He's got kids too, right? Yeah. Everybody has to get paid to do something.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times as a self-managing owner, if somebody called and said, hot water tanks, blah, 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 the next thing you're doing is saying, I'm on my way, right? And they go out and look at it. So their diagnosis is being done, but like you said a while ago, they're not factoring in their time into that.
Sure. The other thing with self-managing owners that turn over their properties is they oftentimes will have, employed an imperfect solution. So I was talking to Michael, our electrician, the other day. He was on the pod, and he said, oftentimes I go up into an attic and I see all sorts of crazy splices off the kitchen circuit. I see a splice that goes all the way to a back bedroom to a recep. And so the tenant doesn't understand why when they plug in their space heater, which is going to trip the fuse, the breaker to begin with, why my outlets in the kitchen go off. Well, if I can get in
the
touch,
refrigerator turns off. Yeah.
Right. Totally. And he said, I would love to be able to talk to the last person that did the work because it will save a bunch of time in me understanding how I untangle this rat's nest before I just spend hours diagnosing this problem and solving it the right way. And, the owner who's employed somebody, to go up and do the work doesn't understand, again, liability, how much liability they have in hiring somebody that probably isn't doing it the right way. And of course, electrician, the contractor has to get up and do things to code every time they touch it. And then they also don't know that ultimately it takes way more time and energy and money on their part to untangle what has already been done, probably poorly, once we get involved and actually have to make sure. But they make sure that it's done correctly. I guess I should finish my sentence. But they also don't understand that there's significant liability associated with what they've done in the first place. So they just don't get all the pieces. It can be a challenge for sure. Let's talk for a moment about consolidation in the property management industry. There's been so much VC money that's come in and supported or funded a couple of companies that have been buying up property management companies around the country, consolidating. Why are they doing that first? Is that a benefit to the industry? Is it a benefit to property owners? What's your general take on
that? Man, that's a big question. I think they're doing it because they want to consolidate, get some numbers, and then resell. Like that's the ultimate goal for that play. Yeah. I think it's worked well for some property managers who maybe had like 1 foot in and 1 foot out of their property management company. Maybe their profit margin was not quite as big because they're running they got a side hustle they're doing here or there. And it's given them the opportunity to go ahead and cash out and pursue another venture. is it good for the industry? I don't know that it's good or bad. I think it's kind of neutral. I don't think it's reducing the number of property management. I mean, those doors are still being managed. And, if it was by A, B, and C, and A bought B and C, then that's still the same number of doors being managed. They're doing it because kind of like what we just talked about, from a self-manager to a property manager, we can do it at scale and have some efficiencies, and they're doing it at bigger scale and have even more efficiencies.
Yeah.
I think for, let's just say here in Tulsa, I think we've seen it when some of these have come in and bought up some companies. I think there's less personal touch for the local investor, which may not matter to somebody that lives in Idaho buying something in Tulsa.
Yeah.
But for the local people, there's less personal touch. I mean, somebody that uses Keyrenter or Renter's Place can usually, if they want, they can get in front of you or I, or somebody on our staff pretty easily. Yep. So I think it's interesting. I think they're kind of, there's not going to be any end to VC money, right? I mean, it's out there, and they're going to continue to chase anything they think they can make some money on by consolidation. I think we're still the verdict's still out on how that's going to work in property management.
I mean, we've seen some of the key industry players trying to raise money from VC, big VC players, and then consolidate small property management companies with the idea that they're going to resell based on a new multiple. So they buy a property management company on a 3 times EBITDA multiple, and they want to sell on a 10 times revenue multiple, because that's what tech businesses do. That's what Uber does. They trade on a multiple of revenue, and the multiple of revenue only makes sense if you're seeing incredible, and I'm talking year on year 300% growth. That's the only way that multiple, that sale multiple, makes sense. And yet they're applying the tech multiple to what amounts to a pretty stodgy old business. I mean, it's a old school business. We do things the hard way generally, with a lot of elbow grease and long hours. And I just don't see how that plays out long term. I certainly don't see how it plays out in a rate environment like we have. When money was free, you could you could make a little bit of money and you were still above what the risk-free rate is. Now that the risk-free rate is significantly higher, I just don't see how the risk associated with those investments makes any sense at all.
Well, our friend Scott Brady used to say, property management is a penny and nickel business, right? We're doing a lot of work picking up pennies and nickels behind it to cobble together to make that. I think those tech that you're talking about are taking nickel businesses and making them into $5 bills, right? I think there is a little bit of if you or I walked into somebody who was still, doing paper leases and just everything old school, I think you could look at that portfolio and say, yeah, I could take those nickels and turn those into dimes.
Sure.
Maybe quarters, depending on what they've got. But I don't think there's that max multiple you're talking about. Like, somebody comes to buy me, we're pretty efficient. Somebody comes to buy a Matt at Keyrenter, you're pretty efficient. there's not a lot of overlay that they're going to put on Keyrenter that says, hey, we're taking your revenue from 1 time to 5 times in 12 months. I don't think that's possible.
Right.
Now,
we've acquired businesses in the past, and to be able to apply, our back end infrastructure to a stodgy, I should say stodgy because that's what I just said about our businesses, but like a mom and pop, a far more mom and pop business that has fewer efficiencies works out really well. There's just there has been a lot of innovation in our industry over the last 15 years. And you've seen it personally. I've seen it over the last 5, because we started in November of 2017. But, in that period, we've added a bunch of we've integrated the innovations that have formed in our industry through conferences that we've learned about, through conferences like NARPM, which I think you're chairing this year, right? You're chairing the San Diego meeting. And that helps when people that aren't paying attention, aren't part of that property management world, that aren't part of the National Association of Residential Property Managers, don't see. And so the simple things are taking them from, paper leases to electronic leases, and in-person showing to self-showings. But there's also a bunch of additional innovations, like using, screening tools for emotional support animals and all sorts of other stuff that reduces the labor. and outsources to people that do, this sort of stuff at scale, you really can benefit from those sort of consolidations.
Well, I can remember in 2012, just 10 years ago, somebody was like, yeah, we're ready to sign the lease. They came into the office and I had it printed out. I would literally sit across the table from them for 30 minutes, right? Yeah. Here's what this is. Here's this. Do you have any questions? Here's this. Do you have any questions? And now we enter their stuff, which they fill out the application, and then that auto fills into the lease, and we send them the lease for digital signature. They review it on their own time frame, sign it, and it comes back. So for us, it turned an hour process into a 5-minute process through automation. Now, that tenant may sign it in 30 seconds. They may take 3 days to review it, right? Yep. That's up to them on the review. But from the time that we put in it, it's become much more efficient. And that's part of that scale you talk about, where you can buy a more mom and pop company and bring some of that in and make it more efficient, increase the profit. I don't know that buying high functioning property management companies gives you that kind of margin.
Yeah. We also put in our lease a little rider similar to, I don't know who the artist is, Bon Jovi's, concert rider that says, I only want purple M&Ms. The reason for that is not because Bon Jovi really wants purple M&Ms, but rather because he wants to know whether the promoter of the concert and the person at the venue has actually read the rider. And if they see that there's no purple M&Ms, there's probably also going to be some other stuff that isn't properly executed at the concert. So we put in a little rider, and we know right away that we will take that little thing out, and we know then from the tenant's feedback on that lease whether they've read that lease or not. And so if they haven't read that lease, then we can go into a little bit more detail and explain a thing or two. And if not, that we know they've read it in pretty great detail. So it's one way that we've overcome.
You're playing, like Mr. Psychological factors behind the scene over there. And you guys are so crazy.
That's what the number 2 property manager in town does. Tracy Streich has been buying and managing rental properties for 25 years. He's the broker and owner at Renter's Place, which is, to be clear, the number 1 property management company in Tulsa. He manages 600 doors or so, and professionally manages stuff for 15 years, having first bought his rental property himself and investment properties starting back in 1999. Renter's Place is a professional third-party property management company. Tracy, how do people get in touch with you if they want to talk more?
They can go to our website, rentersplace.com, or you can reach out to me, Tracy, Tracy, no I, no E's, just Tracy at rentersplace.com. Happy to visit with anybody. Matt, I appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
I appreciate you, Tracy. Appreciate your professionalism and your friendship. Take care.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.